Okay, I'll start in about 30 seconds.
Hold on.
My hunter started.
Yeah.
Hi, guys.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, we're in our meeting now.
Alex, can you mute these people?
Hi, guys. Frank Post in Escondido, California.
Bienvenido.
Hi, Diane Walter, Winona, Minnesota.
Stephanie McLeod in Merced, California.
And Dan Goldman from upstate New York.
Rahul Masudi from Indian Land, South Carolina.
Belglade, Florida.
We have to wait. Probably. I have a feeling you will be well.
It's Don and Stephanie Wayhouse in Costa Rica.
Hi.
Buenas noches.
Lois and Richard Singer from Waimama, Florida.
Hi, Mama.
Well, good evening, friends. I would like to welcome everyone. I appreciate your coming to this, the first in what, God willing, will be many continuous discussions about the Baha'i faith and its teachings. It's my hope that my presentation tonight and on each of the following Wednesdays will help stimulate some interesting questions and some answers and some sharing. But first, I want to make a few things clear, and I will repeat this prior to each session. These presentations and discussions are focused
500 points is what you're trying to catch up
on
to,
the
and we're going to start doing round one, Barbara.
on ideas related to the Baha'i faith and its teachings as I have come to understand them. So please do not think that these observations I make are authoritative. There is no clergy in the Baha'i faith, so each Baha'i is encouraged to study the Baha'i teachings and share understandings with one another. I will mention the upcoming topic on the weekly invitation on Facebook and on the emailed distribution list. But if you have any questions about a previous session, please refer to my website, where you can go to the Contact Me tab at johnshatcher.com. On that same site, you can find detailed information about myself and my work, a biography, and some detail about each of the things I have tried to accomplish with my work. After my comments tonight, my producer, Alex Kolodner, will read questions that you will type into the chat, either for the everyone to see or for just to Alex himself. If you are new to the faith and you need some more basic information, I invite you to go to the official Baha'i website at Baha'i.org, or the website specialized for the Baha'is of the United States, which is Baha'i.us. So let's begin what I hope will be a journey that will convey to you what I have discovered and am still discovering as a Baha'i. But we'll begin this journey after a prayer offered by my wife, Lucia.
This is a healing prayer for our families, friends, neighbors, and colleagues suffering with COVID-19. Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise.
Thank you, Lucia. Friends, I'm going to treat this the same way I did teaching for 43 years in my courses, and that is to have a logical structure to the sequence of presentations that we have. We'll begin with a broad perspective. Tonight's discussion, therefore, will be on about a wide view of religion as it pertains to human history. And then we'll focus down on particular aspects of that theory of history as it pertains to the nature of the manifestations and so forth. So why do I feel that there is an inextricable relationship between human history and religion? It is the Baha'i belief that without the advent of divine intervention in the form of the prophets or messengers or manifestations, as Baha'is call them, there would be no human progress, no advancement in human civilization, really no civilization at all. So I'm going to give you a few glitzy graphics here to show where we are in relation to where we're going and where we've been. And I mean a broad perspective. According to the current estimate, we are now 4.5 billion years into the life cycle of our star, which is the sun, that brought us into being as a planet. And according also to current estimations, we have about 4.5 billion more to go before this planet becomes uninhabitable. Now, that may seem a pessimistic view. We would like it to last forever, but everything that is composite, the Baha'i writings say, must necessarily decompose. This should not give us any concern, because we presume that God in his infinite majesty has created many such worlds, and that we are not alone in the journey we are taking on planet Earth. But if we compare it to a timeline somewhat similar to that of human development, and so we have birth, only instead of diploid zygotes, we have an explosion where our star gives off the various planets that become us and all the other 8 or 9 planets, depending on how you count. So we've got 2 timelines here. One is the geophysical progress of Earth, which begins, you see, sometime after the explosion of the star, and then we have this, at the same time as the explosion of the star. And then we have the social spiritual refinement, which begins, we don't know exactly when, but a long time ago. But we can estimate and again, this changes as science changes. But if we presume that we are right now, according to the Baha'i faith, in the time of the maturation of this spiritual journey, and human history began about that point there, then the end of the Baha'i cycle, which is said to endure 500,000 years, would be about there. We can see we're not really halfway through our journey. Our journey begins right here, and we're right here. So we've got a long ways to go. And if this were in proportion, this line would be the length of several rooms. This would stay the same. So we've really just begun, and we've come pretty far if we're in a stage of maturation, what I like to call the time when God has seen fit to give us the keys to the car, so that instead of having tyrants and dictators rule over us, we are going to rule ourselves until the end of planet Earth. So what are some of the basic teachings? The oneness of God, the essential unity of religion, which I'll explain in a second, the unity of mankind, the equality of women and men, or men and women, they're equal, so it doesn't matter which way we say it. the elimination of all forms of prejudice, world peace, harmony of religion and science, the independent investigation of truth, the need for universal compulsory education, the need for a universal auxiliary language, obedience to government and non-involvement in partisan politics. Notice partisan being the operant word here. The elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty. Well, hopefully during the course of this year or two, however long this program lasts and however long I last, we will go into each one of these in some extensive detail, more than one session a night. I mean, more than one session. So let's deal with some of the terminology that the Baha'i writings use about the various parts of progress that we've gone in so far, and terms that will still pertain to the future. We begin with the largest. As I say, we're starting wide and then narrowing down. We start with the widest sequence, which is a cycle, which is a sequence of eras or dispensations or religious or religions, as it were. Within each of those cycles then are the various prophets, eras, or dispensations. Now I've listed the two cycles here, the prophetic or Adamic cycle, which are all the prophets from the time of Adam, who was a manifestation, to the beginning of the Baha'i cycle, which is in 1844. So we know the names of at least about 15 or so prophets or manifestations during that period, though some of them, their religions are lost to memory, our collective history. Then we go to eras, which are simply the periods during which a particular revelation or religion is meant to endure. Now, meant to endure, because while Christianity began in about 33 of the Common Era, it still endures, but it was meant to lead into Islam. So we've got Judaism, which was meant to end with the advent of Christ as the Messiah. We've got Christianity, which was meant to lead to Islam, which begins in 622. So Christianity, in effect, was meant to last approximately 6 centuries, or really not that, because a new religion doesn't come until the old religion has become defunct or inoperative or dysfunctional. Then the Baha'i faith, which of course begins in 1844 with the declaration of the Bab. So those are eras or dispensations. Then within each of those dispensations are ages. And so with the Baha'i faith, where we have those distinct ages very carefully delineated, where with the other religions, it's up to religious historians to decide how they wish to block off the various periods in those religions. We have the heroic age, which endured from 1844 to 1921 with the death of Abdu'l-Baha. We have the formative age, which began with the guardianship in 1921. And then we will have the golden age, or the most great peace. And we don't know when that will come or how long it will last, though we know it will come and be operative before the next dispensation starts, which Baha'u'lláh says will not be less than 1,000 years. Now we presume that's 1,000 years from 1844, but since it's just, we know the minimum date, we don't know how it could go 2,000 years for all we know. Then within ages, you've got epochs, and we won't describe those in detail tonight because we're not going into great detail. Again, we're starting with this very overarching view. We are presently, however, in the 5th epoch of the formative age of the Baha'i faith. So from a Baha'i point of view, religion is, our human history is really a spiritual history, inasmuch as history is impelled forward by the advent of these manifestations. And it has an endless destination in the sense that while the Baha'i writings say very explicitly that you cannot get more advanced than a planetary or global polity, that's the furthermost limits of planetary organization. So in other words, the blueprint Baha'u'lláh makes for planetary governance will be the blueprint for governance from here on till the end of the planet. However, that model can be refined endlessly, just as the same as an individual can be refined endlessly. So you've got the fact that God has designed an explicit pathway whereby humankind will progress ceaselessly in bringing about the kingdom of God on earth. But then we ask, where are we in that process? Well, I showed you, that we're at the point of maturity, but what does that mean and where do we go from here? So let me get now a little more narrow into some basics about the Baha'i faith. Insofar as particularly, again, if you're not a Baha'i, some of the basic terminology you need to begin to get familiar with, though we'll be going into this like the life of Baha'u'lláh and the history of the faith in further sessions. Baha'u'lláh is a title for Mirza Hossein Ali. It means the glory of God, even as Christ was the title meaning the anointed one for Jesus. Baha'i then means followers of Baha'u'lláh, Baha'i. Baha'u'lláh wrote well over 100 works that constitute the primary part of Baha'i scripture, though not the totality of Baha'i authoritative texts, which something again we'll explain at another session. The worldwide Baha'i administrative order was designed by Baha'u'lláh himself, and it resides on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, and it is now, the framework of it is complete as of 1963 with the election of the House of Justice. Again, terms we will explain later. Instead of clergy, the Baha'i faith is administered by elected institutions. So it's not personality driven, it's system driven. The Baha'i faith has now become the second most widespread religion in the world, and really that's not quite accurate. It really is the most widespread in the sense that the Baha'i faith has a coherence that all the previous religions do not have or have not retained. So when you talk about, for example, the spread of Christianity, which Christianity? Catholicism, Protestantism, and within Protestantism, which sect? Within the Catholic Eastern Church or the Western Church, and so on. The same thing is true with Islam. The same thing is true with Judaism. So when you talk about the worldwide spread of religion, you're talking about sects within the overall rubric of Christianity, not one centrally governed religion. So we get, again, narrower in our history, the milestones of Baha'i history, which are the life of the Bab, which the faith begins in Persia in 1844 when the Bab declares that he is the Qa'im, that this is the day of judgment or day of days that was foretold in all of the scriptures, whether the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, and many hadiths. And of course, Baha'u'lláh, who was designated indirectly by, and in one case directly by the Bab, we'll get to that at another time. as the one for whom he had prepared the way, in the same way that John the Baptist prepared the way for the advent of Christ. Bahá'u'lláh, born 2 years earlier than the Bab and lived till 1892. Abdu'l-Baha was then the successor appointed by Bahá'u'lláh to be head of the faith, and did so until his demise in 1921, whereupon his will and testament established 3 different institutions, one of which was the guardianship, and the first guardian appointed was Shoghi Effendi, the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha, the great-grandson of Bahá'u'lláh. He died in 1957, whereupon the Universal House of Justice was elected 6 years later at the end of the 10-year World Crusade, which Shoghi Effendi had designed from 53 to 63. Progressive revelation. This is the heart of what Baha'i teachings began with, but really this same theory, if you will, is articulated in every religion, though very indirectly, except with Muhammad. In the Surah of Hud and throughout the Quran, Muhammad teaches the progression of revelation, that he is the successor to Christ, and he mentions the divine status of Abraham, of Moses, and so on. Now, we're kind of staying away from what are called the dharmic thread of religions. Krishna in India, Zoroaster in Persia, though he visited Israel, the Buddha, who was in India and then in China. They were manifestations as well, but there are a number of reasons that we are focusing on the Abrahamic religions, the religions that begin with Abraham, and all of these figures are actually genealogically derived from Abraham as well as spiritually. So we can talk about the dharmic religions another time, and why we're not including them so importantly in our discussion. What do the manifestations teach us? Each manifestation reveals 2 categories of enlightenment or education. The first is the renewal of the spiritual teachings, a renewed articulation of the changeless spiritual attributes and principles that should govern our daily lives. In other words, he brings us new knowledge or a new statement of the knowledge, more updated, more advanced. So spirituality, a good person 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, you would recognize the goodness of that person in their actions in the same way you would recognize a good person today. Goodness doesn't change, but the way in which you express that goodness does change because society changes, and the way in which you can express it changes. Maybe not categorically, but in specific instances. So the second thing the manifestation brings is an updated set of social laws, and these include laws about personal behavior in society and private behavior, as well as the broad category of a social law in the normal sense of the term. So how we can best express this new knowledge in new action, a new strategy for action, I have called it. So now that we have a new global community, which was not existent in the time of Muhammad. Indeed, the greatest thing Muhammad achieved on his own was the amalgamation of the diverse tribes in the Arabian Peninsula, which was one of a feat of incredible ingenuity and an amazing evidence of his power. But that's, again, something we'll get to later when we discuss Islam. Some of the manifestations of the prophetic cycle then are Moses, who produced Judaism, the emphasis of which, and again, these are broad generalizations, were on law and justice. How is justice described and expressed primarily in a tribal community setting, though you could expand on that somewhat. So how do you bring about justice and law? And the image of God as described in most of the writings of the Old Testament are God as a chieftain. He is an image of power, he is a jealous God. He is a vengeful God. He is sometimes perceived to be a capricious God. Now, of course, we would not say that now because we have a more sophisticated image of God. But this was an image of God promulgated to a people that could best understand God in these terms and improve themselves accordingly. Christ brings almost an antithesis image of God. I was going to say Jehovah. And of course, you have different names of God as you have different names of his manifestations. Christ introduces Christianity. The emphasis of Christ's teachings are on love and forgiveness. And therefore, the image of God is a father. You have a father image as opposed to a power chieftain image. I say opposed to, and yet, of course, Christ says the law will not pass away, that the law remains. Maybe the law will change, but the law, insofar as being an integral part of what Christ brings, is inseparable from his spiritual teachings. Even though most Christians or Christian denominations do not study the law, there is a plethora of law that Christ reveals. So the emphasis is on God's sacrifice of his son as Christ willingly sacrificed himself. The forgiveness of humankind and its sins is one of the major themes of the Christian dispensation. This concept of love in all of its forms, the various levels of love, from the personal to the family, to the community, and of course, ultimately to the love of Christ as an image of the love of God. So God is approachable in this image. You pray to this God, and Christ reveals what is called the Lord's Prayer, which is really more of a method of praying than it is a specific prayer. But that's, again, something we'll discuss in the future. So God is a prayer-hearing, prayer-answering God. Muhammad produces Islam, which introduces progressive revelation as a concept, explicit concept, and constitutional governance. Something, again, we'll discuss later, how Muhammad is the first one to describe how you bring about collective justice and a constitutional-based government. So Muhammad emphasizes law and governance as part of the spiritual regimen, which is also very carefully spelled out. Notice there are not many laws about daily behavior in the Christian teachings. There are in Judaism, there are in Islam. So in one sense, Muhammad combines the legalisms of Judaism with the spiritual obeisance to a loving God. But the image of God that Moses describes, like that in the Baha'i faith, is God as a personal God, a God of logic, but also a being beyond our exact comprehension. That's why God sends messengers, so that we can understand him. So he is accessible, God is, only through the prophets, as he progressively reveals himself and produces a plan for human enlightenment, which unfortunately did not come into being under Muhammad or during Islam for reasons that we will describe later. Suffice it to say, in Baha'i terms, the covenant that Muhammad had designed was broken at his death and was never repaired or repairable. The manifestations of the Baha'i cycle then are two. The Bab, who has the Bahá'í faith, announces this is the day of days, the last judgment, the time of the end, all of which terms are explained in the Baha'i writings, because these terms had become so misunderstood by followers of previous religions who believed this day of days was coming, but thought this in some cases meant the end of the world, that the last judgment was the last judgment of all people, and so on. This too is a God of logic, love, wisdom, a God who has a plan, but of course the focus of the Bab's teaching is on the coming of Bahá'u'lláh, his statement proving that he is the Qa'im, the fulfillment of Islamic expectations, and he foreshadows the fulfillment of all that has gone before. With Bahá'u'lláh and the Baha'i faith, we have the announcement that humankind has come of age. Notice he doesn't say this will happen, he says it has happened. Now, of course, it has happened in a practical sense, that the planet has become one community, interdependent and collaborative, but not yet mature spiritually or politically. So we have a God portrayed by Baha'u'lláh as a personal God, and yet the Baha'i writings explain that we will never know God directly, even in the afterlife. Again, something we'll explain later. He explains the logic again of history, explains the future of history. More specifically, he explains what is a manifestation. How are they distinguished from ordinary human beings? And what is their power and purpose? And he lays out in detail the plan for a lasting justice and a global peace, among many other things. So some foundational Baha'i beliefs related to human history. Baha'is believe there is one God and that all the world religions are actually one religion revealed by God through his prophets in successive and progressive stages. This to me has come to be an important sentence. When someone says, what is the Baha'i faith? I always fumbled for an answer for the first 5 or 10 years as a Baha'i, because I wanted to say, you know, have you got a half hour or an hour? I'll explain it to you. So I finally derived one statement that said enough that if a person was interested, I could build on. And that is, we believe that God, there is a God, and there is one religion which is revealed in progressive and successive stages. So there's not really the several religions or stages in the one religion, the religion of God, which of course Muhammad stresses when he talks about the people of the book. When he's talking about the people of the book, he means the followers of God from the previous religions and the book or word of God revealed for those religions by those manifestations. So this means that there really is no conflict between religions except that which has been created by the misunderstanding on the part of followers. Conflicts that have been interjected usually by the clerics. So if you're a student of religion, it used to be, when I first started teaching even, that the study of religion was primarily a study for believers to understand more fully their beliefs. Religious studies has now become almost exclusively a study of the history of religions. So it's just become a more specialized history course. And so the study of religions focuses on, well, what happened to Christianity after the death of Christ? Well, you have the conflicts that arise among the disciples and you have the teachings of Paul versus the teachings of James or the teachings of Peter, which ultimately result in the complete schism in Christianity. The same thing is true with the study of Islam. Why did Islam immediately split at the death of Muhammad? The principal reason for creation, according to Baha'i belief, is the enlightenment and evolution of the individual and society as a whole. Now, we're focusing for the moment on planet Earth, but everything we conclude about the pattern of spiritual evolution on planet Earth, I believe, would equally apply to every other planet that has gone through, is going through, or will go through the same process. One beautiful analogy or metaphor that Abdu'l-Bahá uses when he talks about this is he describes the planet and other planets that have human life as a seed in the matrix of the universe. And so what Baha'u'lláh has given us is an understanding of how that seed grows, what makes it grow, and what the blossom of that, the fruit of that plant will be. And it will be a world civilization with a global polity, world peace, and even, again, the means of ensuring that peace. This process of growth and evolution, again, is progressive revelation through the divinely appointed teachers or manifestations. And our obligation, and this will be a long discussion we'll have later on, because this theme goes throughout the Baha'i writings and the structure of the Baha'i faith itself. Our twin obligations as individuals are, one, to recognize these teachers when they appear, and two, and notice I've said freely in both cases, obey the guidance they bring for our individual and collective spiritual and social development. So you have, for example, the twin aspects of the hidden words, the Arabic and Persian. You have the twin major revealed books of Baha'u'lláh, the one which tells the new knowledge, the Igan, the one which puts that knowledge into action, the Kitab-i-Aqdas. This twin aspect of our lives, knowing and doing, are integrated in everything that we learn and all that we study. And of course, the Rui or Institute courses are a prime example of that. You study and then you have an action component, at least for the first books in that series. The ultimate destiny of humankind on planet Earth, again, to establish an endlessly evolving global community. Now, of course, this seems to be at odds with, what I said about the Earth exploding or going non-existent. Endless until that happens. In other words, we don't get to a point where we've got it all done. In the same way that Abdu'l-Bahá says, an individual never gets to some final point of spiritual development. We are capable, literally capable of infinite spiritual development, which is why we need an afterlife to pick up where we leave off here. So, foundational beliefs about God, again, this is repeating some of what I've already said, but not really. And this, so we'll do a course on the ontology of God. We'll do one on and ontology simply means the nature of the being of God, the nature of the being of the manifestation, and the nature of the being of the human being. So here's a bit about the ontology of God, that God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, God is infinite in every respect, including time. God has no beginning, which will seem to conflict with something I'm going to show you later, which is why we need to study it. But Earth is not, another paradox. And this is something we will discuss throughout the courses, and that is these ostensible paradoxes, what Dan Jordan used to call delicious paradoxes in the Baha'i teachings, that we can resolve by going to the writings. So creation as a whole, not just Earth, but if you take into, if God is a creator and God has always existed, Therefore, creation can have no beginning, nor will it have an end, and the writings confirm this many places. And therefore, I put in cutely, is there life on other planets? Well, of course, there must be. You don't have to agree with that yet, but we'll go over that. God is a personal God, and this quote is because this is directly from the writings. That means he is aware of and concerned with each of us individually, as well as the collective advancement of humankind. God is essentially beyond our direct knowledge, and the essentially is in quotes because it means his essence is unknowable, but his reality or his nature is eminently knowable. That is, we know all about God. So we know everything except what he looks like. And since he has no physical dimension other than the universe itself, we know quite a lot more than we probably know about most other people we know, including ourselves. So some of the paradoxes we will be studying. God is knowable but not knowable, the one we just looked at. We are essentially spiritual but must endure a physical existence. Why is that? That will be a course of several sessions. I mean, a subject of several sessions. God wants us to recognize his messengers, but conceals them as ordinary humans. And sometimes he makes them have physical flaws, such as the fact that Moses, according to the scripture, Moses stuttered. Christ was presumed to be a bastard child and came from a very poor village of Bethlehem. God is omnipotent, and yet he does not seem to protect us or his prophets from betrayal, the changes and chances, that should be plural, of life, persecution, even slaughter. Doesn't seem to. And that's something else we'll get to. If God can help us and intervene, why doesn't he do it? And then we finish up tonight, before we start questions and answers, or at least questions. I don't know, I can assure you the answers will come, with what is one of the most important hadiths of Islam. Now, a hadith means a tradition. It doesn't mean it's less true or less authentic than the Quran itself, because like the Quran, the hadiths were written down, and some were written down at the time that Muhammad said them. Not all the hadiths are by Muhammad, but this is a hadith from Muhammad, we presume. We'll get into in another session, what's the difference then between the truth stated in a hadith, or the authority of a hadith, and the authority of the Quran. Here it is. I was a hidden treasure. This is God speaking to us. I wish to be known, and thus I called creation into being in order that I might be known. Very, very deep, very Zen, okay? God is saying, I was hidden from you, but I wish to be known, so I brought creation into being that you might know me. Now this has, again, the ABahá'í has a tablet on this, which is very long and very complex. It hasn't been authoritatively translated, but it has been translated provisionally. And it's something we will spend a lot of time on in the future. But suffice it to say, Baha'u'lláh says much the same thing in several places. One most prominently in the Arabic hidden word number 3. Veiled, so hidden, in my immemorial being and in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee, therefore I created thee, have engraved on thee mine image and revealed to thee my beauty. And of course, we could talk about this at great length. What does it mean, his image, if God doesn't have a physical image? So it doesn't mean physical. Obviously, it has to do with our capacity to become spiritual, to have cognition, to form a love relationship with this being who loves us. How do we know? Well, he says, I loved you even before I created you. But how can that be? How can you love something that has not been created? Here I bring into, and this is strictly my own thought, but I think it's a decent one or I wouldn't be sharing it with you. It's in an enigma similar to that of the hidden treasure. How parenting helps teach us about God's motive in creating. Why does God create? He doesn't have to. The Baha'i writings say he's self-sufficient. He doesn't need our love, in spite of what many a preacher told me when I used to be in the Methodist Church. So what is our purpose in having children? Dwell on that a while. And, you know, it's something we, again, could discuss at great length. Hopefully we will. What does it require of us? Well, when I say what's the purpose is, what good does it do us in any practical sense? They break our hearts, they spend our money, and we dedicate our lives, we would give our lives for them. So why would we bring something like that upon us? And you know that people who can't have children would do anything to have children. So there's something in us that wants to bring about a child. It requires every minute of your time, or at least a good portion of it, and so on. There's no need to me explain this, you know this. It requires a lot of us. Selflessness, if we do it right. What benefit do we derive from it? Well, we love being loved, but we love the loving. And so we love the child even before the child is out of that womb. What objective do we have for our child or our children? We may have some ulterior motive that aren't spiritual, that aren't good, that are self-serving, want them to inherit our company or carry on our good name or whatever. But those who don't have the opportunity for such specious motives have an objective that is something more like unto God wanting to bring us about. What would we sacrifice for our children? And of course, we would sacrifice just about anything. What do we learn from this process? Well, one of the things I think we learn is what true love is about. It's probably the most important love relationship we have. And what we learn from it, I think one of the things is about God's motive in creating us. He knows he has something to give. He knows that knowing him will benefit a being if that benefit could know him. And what virtues do we require? We could sit and talk about this for a long time. But selflessness, forgiveness, patience, on and on. Then finally, we'll end with what is the basics about human ontology? And by that, I mean, what is the basic nature of the human being? And this we will discuss at great length. The human being begins during the process of conception. So we don't have a beginning. I mean, we do have a beginning, but we don't have an end, because at that process, the soul emanates from the realm of the spirit, establishes associational relationship with the body, which continues until the body is no longer capable of sustaining that association, at which point the soul continues to develop from where it left off by being born into, and that's in quotes, the spiritual realm, because we're really already there. We're really already there. We're simply under the illusion that we are physical. And that's something else we'll get into, is why God has us assume this illusion that we are physical when we're spiritual. What are we supposed to learn from that? So the soul is our essential reality. It is non-composite, and therefore it doesn't decompose. It is from this essential reality that all our fundamental human powers derive, and these include free will, abstract thought, conceptual memory, reason, judgment, everything that distinguishes us as humans. And this is something I will show you later. I'm going to stop now, but this is a sort of glitchy PowerPoint I do to show you how this works. You have the soul, which of course we've got in a box, though, even though it's non-composite and it doesn't exist in the physical world, but its powers of consciousness and so on go through or associate with the brain, which is represented by this prism. And like a prism, that power is shown all the various aspects of ourself, such as consciousness ideation. So it comes from a spiritual notion and is translated by the brain as a transceiver into active expressions of all of these spiritual capacities. And the idea is to do this without having too much interfere with the accuracy of how this expresses this. So I've got questions to ponder for our next meeting. I've got all of these, and I was going to go over these, but my voice is getting tired, and I'm sure you're getting tired of hearing me, but I will have these on the recording of this session. Don't know when we'll have that up, but it will be both on my website, johnshatcher.com, and it will be on my YouTube channel where they will be accessible as well, and we'll be getting that information to you. So let me stop sharing my screen and share my face. And respond to any questions that you might have. So Alex, if you would go to the chat, and I'm going to get something to drink here.
Yep, absolutely. We'll just give everyone a moment to type their questions into the chat box. For those that have not seen my message, feel free to type them into the public chat, or you can send them to me directly, and I'll be happy to read them out.
Alex Kolodner is helped me put all of this together. He is the producer and director of this, and will help me out as long as he's needed, which could be a pretty long time. And you worked in Haifa, right?
In fact, that was my brother. So if I
okay.
look familiar to anybody that's in Haifa, then you met the other half.
Okay.
So far, Dr. Hatcher, we're getting just some general comments complimenting the talk. Folks are saying how wonderful it was, how they would love to send this to the other members of their community. We did have one question that perhaps you can start with.
Donald Boney, I'd like to answer Donald's question, because Donald and I have been talking about the Baha'i faith for a couple of years now. I've known him since we were in grammar school together at Morningside School in Atlanta. Donald, you said, what does the soul do in the afterlife? And we'll get into that in other courses, but suffice to say that you read basically, if you imagine yourself detached from your body now, but you had all the powers of your brain as you think they emanate from your brain, of remembering your life, of being able to think and so on. The Baha'i writings go into great detail about the fact that this life is really just preparation for the next life, and that the soul is really us. And so your essential self, you, Donald Boney, I'm afraid to tell you, you're never going to cease to exist. And so you've got to realize that you're going to deal with all the questions you have now and so on. But you will have a means of asking questions, getting answers, and progressing spiritually ad infinitum. You will never cease to exist. You will be reunited with those you have lost in this life, and I know that is precious to you, and so on. So it is truly a birth into a more expansive reality, not some. Let me put it this way. The best way to distinguish it from the ordinary concept of the afterlife as told by other religions is it's not static. You aren't relegated to some condition according to what you've done here, though you do feel the results of what you've done here. So you can't say that everyone attains the same, is in the same condition or the same state and so on. But you have the free will to pray, to ask for forgiveness for anything you feel you need to be forgiven for, and to progress as far as you want. That's just touching on it. This is something that needs to discuss at length, and the Baha'i writings are extremely plentiful on this subject. And thank you for coming, Don.
Awesome. So the next question is why, and I'll fill in some of the gaps here to that. Why were family members chosen to follow the administrative responsibilities of Baha'u'lláh? For example, his son and grandson, Shoghi Effendi. Why were they chosen to lead the faith?
Well, notice in both cases, they had Baha'u'lláh and Abdul Baha had choices. Baha'u'lláh had several children from whom he could have chosen this. The same thing with Abdul Baha. There were many cousins of Shoghi Effendi that could have been chosen. There is both a tradition and a spiritual meaning to the firstborn son's responsibility. Of course, this goes all the way back to Judaism. This is something that's discussed by Shoghi Effendi in his talks on the nature of Baha'i governance and administration, of all the components that constitute the Baha'i concept of administration. The fact is that inheritance is one of those. And so Muhammad chose Imam Ali, who was his first male lineal descendant, his first cousin, also his son-in-law. And from him on, all of the imams were the first-born male descendant. So there is that, but the writings state that if Abdul Baha had not seen in Shoghi Effendi those qualities appropriate to the guardian, he would not have been chosen. And of course, in the will and testament, for example, the first male lineal descendant of the guardian would have been the successive guardian, unless the hands of the cause decided that he did not bear those qualities, that did not exemplify those qualities necessary to bear that burden and to carry on that role. So there's lots of things to discuss there, both the practical, the traditional, and so on. But if you're, the best way to discuss it is to go into the history, the fact that Abdul Baha was the first to believe in Baha'u'lláh, was with him throughout his ministry, imprisoned with him, helped him, and so on. So he was also the logical choice, but he was also the genealogical choice. All right.
Thank you.
And again, none of these answers are going to be complete, and not all of them are going to be coherent even, but we can discuss them later. And that's why, you know, what thrills me about this course, or I say a course, these discussions, but I'd look at it as a course, is that we will have opportunities to do right what we've done wrong, to make clear what has not been clear, and so on. Okay, next, go ahead, Alex.
Yep, and we actually have quite a few questions coming in. So let me try and feed you a softball here, and then we'll get
okay.
two fastballs.
Answers. The problem is these questions are not softballs and require a lot of discussion. So I'll try to keep my answers more more cryptic.
Absolutely. And we'll pause after these next three questions and see where we are for the evening. All right. So the first question is, if we have ended the prophetic or Adamic cycle, what cycle are we in right now?
We're in a cycle called the Baha'i cycle. Again, there's two terms, the Baha'i era and the Baha'i cycle. The Baha'i era designates the dispensation of Bahá'u'lláh, which we're told will last not less than 1,000 years. And the Baha'i cycle means all of those manifestations who will appear in what is called in the shadow of Baha'u'lláh, meaning in carrying on what he has produced. And that will endure, we are told, for 500,000 years, which seems like a long time, but it'll go by in a flash. Also, the question was asked, what do you do once you've achieved and refined global unity? What's next? Think about that one, because with that much time, we could go beyond that, i.e., interplanetary unity. Who knows? So maybe these science fiction works aren't all of that fictional. Okay.
So there's your softball in preparation for your fastball here, which is so I'll broaden the.
Don't give me any curveballs. All right, go ahead.
I'll broaden the question a little bit. The question specifically asks around why does Baha'u'lláh urge us to pray for our parents' souls, and how does that benefit them? And I'll broaden it to be, why does prayer benefit those that have passed, whether it be the fact that they've passed yesterday or they've passed decades ago or even hundreds of years ago?
Okay. We believe, obviously, and again, lots of the writings deal with the power of prayer. We believe prayer can have a physical effect or a spiritual effect, both. So, and of course, there have been studies showing how prayer can affect things like plants and animals and people who are sick. There have been scientific double-blind studies on this, that prayer does have an effect. But why should we pray for those who have passed on? One of the reasons that the writings say is because they brought you forth, that you owe them, in effect, that you want to help them. If they were not good parents, then you want to help them to find their way in the next world. So, I mean, it could be. And again, this is my own theoretical talking. It could be they are spiritually not yet at a level that you are in this life. They may have passed on as reprobates or whatever, or as abusive. So you want to pray for their forgiveness and their ability to recognize what they have done and to proceed from where they are and get better. In the same way, they are praying for you, the writings say. They are praying for you. All right. So we pray for the advancement of the soul of someone who's passed on, because they still have the same capacities that you have here. So, I mean, there's no real difference. You're praying for a soul which is associating with a body. You're praying for a soul that's dissociated from the body, but it's still a soul in progress. It always will be a soul in progress. And you want it to progress as best it can. And maybe you know some particulars about that soul that you think you can focus on that will help them. So we know it has an effect, to put it simply, whether in this world or in the next world or from or enter between worlds, one way or the other, from that world to this world or this world to the next world. Did I answer the question? Okay, I was thinking there was another part to it, but that's basically it. Prayer has an effect. It has effect on souls. One thing I remember what it was. One thing I wanted to say about that was time. There is no time in the next world. That means that I want to pray that your surgery for your heart went well, but it's already happened, but I don't know that. Does God have the capacity to say, well, you prayed for it, but it was just not in the nick of time? No. In a timeless realm, which prayer is part of, God could have pre-known that you were going to do that and put it on the scale, if you will. Okay. Now, I don't mean to portray God as some sort of legalistic thing where you have this scale and 3 prayers for, 2 prayers against, and sorry. But at any rate, the idea of time has always been important to me, because sometimes I'll think, oh my gosh, I forgot to pray for this event. And then I realize, well, it will still have, it still is meaningful. And it's meaningful, of course, to the suppliant as well, the one making the prayer. It's training you as well.
Excellent. And let's dovetailing with that previous question.
Go on as long as you think it wise, producer.
Awesome. Let's get, we've got 2 questions in the pipeline.
Okay.
And let's take a pause after these next 2 questions and see how we do.
Okay.
The next question, the first question of these 2 dovetails perfectly with the previous question, which is in your talk, you mentioned the infinite nature of creation, and you contrasted it with Earth in particular as a finite creation.
Right.
Why draw this contrast with Earth rather than the universe as a whole? And do the writings make it clear either way whether the universe is finite, like creation, or finite, like Earth?
Yeah, the writings make it pretty clear that creation has always existed, that it changes in composition and form, it's constantly changing, but that it has always existed. It didn't come from nothing, nothing does, but of course that's a logical thing to observe. So even the hot big bangers, and that's not a rock term, even those scientists or cosmologists who affirmed their belief in the theory of a hot big bang, that everything began at a certain point in time and place, are kind of folding their cards and leaving the table in favor of this was maybe a sequence of big bangs and so on. And I'm reading a very good book on that, as a matter of fact. But again, what scientists have a great deal of trouble handling is the concept of infinity. And the writings say, and you can say, well, it's not being literal, it's being figurative, that the universe is endless and the stars are endless. And we think, well, that can't be. It's got to be contained in something. Why? Why does it? So we have a great deal of trouble accepting the fact that infinity exists, and yet arithmetic, which is the most explicit description of reality we can deal with, all you have to do to get to infinity is keep adding 1 to whatever number you have in hand, and you never stop. So you know that arithmetically infinity is feasible, possible. So the difference is that our Earth had a beginning, our solar system had a beginning, our galaxy had a beginning. We see galaxies going in and out of being. We see now clusters of galaxies. We now have a picture of thousands of galaxy clusters. So you have the Earth rotating around the sun rotating within the galaxy of the Milky Way. The Milky Way itself is rotating, and then you know, who knows, and a galaxy cluster is itself a system. There may be systems bigger than galaxy clusters. So the point is, we don't know enough to know now that much to speculate that, oh, the universe began at this point at this time. My answer would simply be, no, the universe does not have to have a beginning. In fact, it is contrary to any logic that it would have. Whereas the Earth, and so on, I'm repeating myself now. Was that clear at all?
Of course.
Well, don't say of course, it may not have been.
Well, we can always rewatch it. That's
yeah,
why.
we can always, of course, we are going to deal with these questions in the course.
And so before I ask the last question of the evening, I just want to apologize for all those folks that have sent in their questions. You'll just have to join us next week and going forward.
After that, and the week after
yep.
that, and the week after that, until John drops, or Alex drops, or my computer drops. Go ahead.
Yep. So the last question of the evening is, why do we still refer to God as He in English language when in the Persian language it uses the gender neutral you when referring to God, and that's you, the translation of the letter. Yep.
Two would be in Spanish. I know the familiar, and in fact, when we translate the prayers, "Oh mi Señor, tú," we use the tu form when we translate the prayers from the Baha'i prayers into Spanish. The fact is that we don't have another pronoun in English to use, and so it's a disadvantage. Obviously, God has no gender, so you could say it's misogynistic or something like this. Of course, it comes from tradition of language, and so you can't escape the confines of language and how it works. So Arabic is great in that way, in that it can do that. But when the Guardian translated from the Arabic into English, he chose to use this, and we're pretty much following the Guardian's choice. And he spent many years or a great deal of effort deciding what style he would translate the writings in, and he translated them principally into English. And so that helps us a lot in many respects, because English is a very rich language, and therefore things that are ambiguous in either Persian or Arabic are made clear when the Guardian translates them into English. But the only reason I can say is the constraints of language and the tradition of God being called He. We don't want to use it, and of course there were efforts during the earlier part of the 70s, when the movement for further rights and acknowledgement of the equality of men and women was occurring, to not use the masculine pronoun for the manifestation, and the House of Justice said, no, we really are going to follow the Guardian's lead on this. So again, that's a very choppy answer, but the problem is the problem with language. Sherveen says to everyone, it's always that way in the Baha'i writings, and it is, but the reason it's that way in the Baha'i writings is because the Guardian chose to translate it that way, and the reason he did is he chose to follow the Elizabethan verb, for he loved the King James Bible as a style, in the same way he uses a mixture of the classical style in his choice for the buildings of the administrative quarters on Mount Carmel. So he uses this style he has chosen as a sort of classical style for the English of translating the holy text. I could take a good hour just to discuss translating the holy text, and it would be a lot of fun, and maybe we can do that on a more casual note at some point.
But we'll have to add that to future weeks here. The
Yeah.
discussion of the translation.
Let me finish with one other thing. When I realized we were really going to do this, I thought, well, this could go on for at least a year. So let me see if I could write down 52 topics. It took me less than 20 minutes to write down 52 topics. So we got no fear of running out of stuff to discuss without repeating ourselves, friends. but it will have a logical kind of sequence, because in my mind, I'm still teaching college and this is still a course, but there will be no final exam from me. There will be a final exam for each of you. So, aloha.
Thank you all for joining this evening. For those that asked the question, yes, it's going to be the same Zoom link for next week. So you can bookmark this Zoom link and you can add it to your calendar. It will always be the same.
Good point. Good point. All right, I'm going to leave. Is that okay?
Yep, I'll go ahead and close the room. Have a good night, everyone.